Okay, well, after a 20-minute delay, I'm very sorry about that, everyone, but it is our first day on the air, and oh my God, were we having problems. I'm George from George's Family Matters. Today is Monday, December 5th. Ahead this week, we have on Tuesday, and hopefully on time, hopefully not 20 minutes late, relational trauma with Lori Landry, childhood trauma into adulthood. Then on Wednesday, we have Foster Adoption 101 with Carolyn Goodridge, the, the basic ABCs. On Thursday, we have my son, child of the system, Carlos Herraz, foster child to adoptee to adult, and soon to be father. And he's very excited about that, actually. Um, and excuse me if I seem like I'm a nervous wreck today. I kind of am, and plus things, as you can tell, were going wrong. It's our first show. Nerves were kind of high. Technology was not going for us necessarily. And what can go wrong? Apparently everything, including my headset that doesn't fit very well. 2 weeks ago, we were supposed to be on the air. A $10 part kind of ruined that show. And $10 later, here we are and 20 minutes late. But we're here, and that's the important thing. I hope that we're going to be able to get callers. I hope that we connected properly with that. I'm just going to double check something. And I'm sure nobody minds because nobody wants to have more problems. Okay. Let's get to where we need to be. Later in the show, we're going to have grieving a child that is still alive and a word from Mother Teresa, which right about now I think we can really use. Today's show is Dismantled. The cover-up is over. We have with us Suzy Collin, author of Dismantled, The Family on William Street East, and The Joy of Life of a Diet Dropout. She's also an artist, and we're going to be seeing her paintings later in the show as well. So without waiting any longer, we have Suzy Mitchell-Collin on the phone. Suzy, can you hear me okay?
I can, George. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I was wondering what could go wrong today. I was not expecting a 20-minute delay wrong. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip all the commercials today, which I guess is a good thing. Nobody really wants to hear commercials anyways. And, well, why don't we get started, Suzy, with some questions. What we're going to be showing today or talking about is your book that you wrote. And
Okay.
it's Dismantled. And I have it up on the screen for people to see the front and back cover and a lovely picture of you. Suzy, how did you come to write this book?
Oh, big question. Okay. Well, George, if you remember, my husband Pat and I met you when your son was a very small baby, and our son was a couple of years older, and we walked down to the ferry in Rocky Hill that went to Glastonbury, the oldest operating ferry in the U.S., by the way. And so we took the ferry over there, which is a very short ride, but the children loved it. And we made your acquaintance and saw you off and on basically for a couple of years before we moved out of town. And didn't really keep in contact much except that the restaurant we owned used to come there with your children. And so my husband, Pat, kind of kept in touch with you more than I did. So anyway, 20 years goes by, and we see your picture in the paper with your mate that you had been arrested for charges of sexual molestation of your adopted children. And we had been so impressed with your abilities to be a father and the times we were with you, which were pretty, frequent, that we both knew that, or were pretty convinced that you could never have done such a thing. So I called you one day after we saw your basically your mug shots in the Hartford Current on the front
Can you
page,
hear it?
and called you to say that we wanted to offer support, that we couldn't believe such a charge that would have happened to you, of all people. And though we hadn't spoken for 20-some years, I said my name and said, I don't even know if you remember me, but my husband and I wanted to call and just tell you that we supported you, and we couldn't believe that you would do such a thing. And so that one thing led to another, and you asked if I would be interested in writing a book about it, about the story. And what you told me about the story made me very interested to write something to correct such an injustice, if an injustice had been done, which at that time I wasn't sure of, but I figured it. And anyway, so that one thing led to the other, and we wound up agreeing that I would write a book about it, and I gave the agreement that I would do that after investigating, but I would write that you were guilty if I found out that you were after I investigated it. And it took me 6 months to really go through the documents that luckily you had many, many documents you had saved. And I studied them, and basically it took me 6 months to get the names of the children together, because there were 9 adopted children, special needs children, that you had adopted with your partner. And I read through many, 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 many documents from floor to halfway up the ceiling. And the school documents, psychological reports, pediatrician reports, all kinds of things. And I also interviewed multiple people that were involved with the case. And so I came upon this story at the end when you had been arrested. I never saw the children that you had, was not a part of that. But when you had been arrested, that's where I came in and then started investigating. And after 6 months, I was absolutely convinced that you're innocent. And so I went forward to write the story and try to correct a huge, horrific injustice that had been done to you and your family and to these children. And that's how it happened. Long answer, huh? Got to cut my answers shorter than that.
No, long answers are good. We want long answers. Now, Suzy, I should probably tell everybody, this talk show is going to be entertaining, uplifting, inspiring, but there are family matters that we have to talk about, and it's going to be everyone sharing. And this particular day is a very emotional one for me, because we're talking about the book that was written about my family and what happened to my family. And to say that it's emotional is an understatement. So for me, it's a very difficult subject, but one that I really felt needed to be talked about. And I want people to understand, today it is about my family, and tomorrow it won't be, thank goodness. And unfortunately, we did it on a day that everything got screwed up a little bit. And again, I apologize for that. Suzy, what would you say is the main story of the book?
Well, from what I could see and what I investigated and studied, there was a flourishing family who had come forward to adopt 3 special needs sets of siblings. A very unusual, unlikely thing, because most people wouldn't want to do that. And you faced challenging issues with each set of these siblings. And by my recollection, there was probably only one of all the 9 children that was what you would call, quote, normal. And you had taken these children in a decade and turned them into a success story. So much so that you were nominated to be Fathers of the Year in the town newspaper. You were just a reality show producer was courting you to put your family on reality TV show, which you declined because of privacy issues for the children. And the things that you had done were so admirable to me. You were like the poster family for how to succeed in where no one else will go. And so I was so impressed with that. And then to see what happened to you after there was a false allegation from one of the children who was 5 when he was adopted, and then was 15 when the time that the false allegations came. And I say false allegations, George, because I am 100% convinced that they were false after all my investigations, which were really in depth. Anyway, to see that these allegations, which had been forthcoming even before the first adoption, and were categorized in the possession of DCF, the Department of Children and Families, in Connecticut, uh, that they were disregarded when the allegation came from the child who was 5 when he had been adopted, came up with a series of them over the years, which have been well documented in the possession of DCF. And all of a sudden, somebody decides to think that they're accurate without really going into the history. And then to find out that when you adopted these children, you had made actually very, very clear that you did not want to adopt children that had any sexual history. That was withheld from you. So from the beginning, I saw a setup that a government agency placed children with you without your knowledge of what their history was, which was actually predictable that allegations would come later, that would be forthcoming. Any responsible person in the position of a state government worker should have known these things. And then when the allegation came, they yanked the 5 younger children from your custody, from your family, where they were flourishing, and put them back into foster care system where they were no longer flourishing. In fact, one was put into residential care and has been there for 5 years. Well, he was 10 when he was taken. Now he's 15. He's been locked up, and this was just untenable to me. I just couldn't really understand how this could happen. In the beginning, I was very naive, thinking no government agency would ever do such a thing. But as time went on, and the 4.5 years it took me to write this book and to go to court hearings and meet with multiple people, I just thought that someone has to see and someone has to tell what can happen and to beware of what can happen to innocent people. So, I mean, it just was a story that I just thought had to be told, that people should know about. It's a hard story to write. Many nights I didn't even sleep because it was so awful, what had to be written in an accurate manner to present what actually did happen, as far as, psychological reports, court documents, statements that were made by the accusers. And, it just had to be told. And I thought that I was supposed to do that. Does that answer your question?
It does, very much so. And Susan, in writing this story, how did it affect you as a writer? Did it affect you?
Well, I was at the beginning of my writing career. I remember the day that I talked to you on the phone. I actually called you to tell you that Pat and I did not believe that you could have done this thing after we saw you as a consummate father with your son. And anyway, I was thinking at the time, I can't believe that a government agency would have done this. I was extremely naive, didn't know a lot about government, media, how much hatred there is out there for anyone who has a different sexual orientation. I was not prepared to really understand all that. It took me a while to get it. And what I got was not good. It was not a happy story. And the treatment that you received, your children received over the years by the court, by the media, by a government agency, was just something that shocked me. It shocked me to my core. I still, to this day, don't believe that this can happen in a country that operates under the rule of law.
Well, I have to say, as the person that went through it, it was very difficult to sit in court and listen to the things that were said, and the treatment that we had with multiple search and seizures, and it was horrendous. Susan, how did you feel when Doug actually had a trial and was found not guilty? Because obviously, maybe you want to talk about how people testified in his case, particularly the accuser, and how that went, and also how you felt when my case was completely dismissed for lack of any evidence that they
Well,
could bring forward.
starting with Doug's trial, your mate at the time. Starting with his trial, I was there for the mostly. I think I maybe missed one or two hearings, maybe two, but I was there for most of it, and was able to take time off from work to get there. And it was so. It's hard to describe to someone who doesn't know the case, or even someone who does know it, how it was. There were so many people that testified as to Doug's innocence. They tried you separately, as you know. They first tried Doug, and they kept your trial for the next one. And it was just so consummately obvious that there was just a cover-up of the accusations. Once the accusations were clearly discounted, there was still a cover-up by DCF to try to save face and get your trial coming up next. And it was clearly stated in the trial that the accuser had a diagnosis, or I don't know if it's exactly a diagnosis in the DSM, but a mental condition called pathological lying. And there was so much testimony to support that, and there was testimony by ombudsmen and so forth to testify that the placements in your family were very, very highly irregular, and that DCF had, in fact, asked you to adopt more children than the law required, and so they had to have waivers to make that happen. In short, there was so much in that trial that was so clearly making sure that, in fact, the trial judge made a statement at the end of the trial with her verdict of not guilty for Doug, your mate at the time, that these charges never should have been put forward, that the government agency that was in charge of this case withheld exculpatory information that would have made a warrant for your arrest absolutely impossible. And this never appeared in the paper. This never appeared in the paper. Everything that I saw every time that I was in the court, what appeared in the paper was pro-government agency media feedback. And there was never anything that, although there were times when it was so clear by a witness in your defense or in Doug's defense at the time, it was so clear that there was destroyed the whole premise of the government agency. And yet that was never reported. And it just was just such a travesty of justice to me that I sometimes I really just couldn't sleep because I was so bothered by the system. And, where's the right to a speedy trial? This was 3.5 years that you were not able to speak and not able to talk. This is probably the first time you've ever really publicly been able to talk, is this evening. And then when your trial came, in my opinion, and a lot of opinion of mostly everybody who was there, when Doug's was found not guilty and the trial judge said this should never have happened, there shouldn't even have been one arrest warrant, there should never have been a trial going forward with you. Instead, what happened was the accusing child, who, by the way, let me say, the accusing child and his brothers who supported him, 3 out of 4, one said that nothing ever happened, and that kid's a hero in my opinion, they were believed outright by the court, by the newspapers, by the reporters, by everybody on the internet, people who condemned you. And, that added to what happened and the what I call a travesty of justice. So, I'm rambling on. I forgot what I was starting to
That's
say.
okay. You know what? When we talk, it's like a conversation. There's really no set thing here, and especially tonight, I can't even go by the clock to tell where we are. I have this beautiful clock marked off every minute of where I'm supposed to be, but I don't know how to add 21 minutes that quickly onto everything, so that's okay. Susan, I do want
Well, I
to
can
ask
talk all
you,
night, so just tell me to shut up.
well, what I want to do for right now is I want to encourage people to call in to ask questions. Our phone number here is
Yes.
202-999-4699. That's 202-999-4699. It's up on the screen. Oh, let's see if I can do this right. No, not enough practice. Right there. There it is. So I pointed at it. Now, Susan, I do have another question for you while we're waiting for callers, and what I hope is not happening because I don't see any callers on here. I hope that we're actually connected because we had some big problems with the phone trying to get connected tonight, and I don't know what came out at the beginning. If people could hear background stuff, it was not smooth. But it was our first day too, so I guess we're allowed to make some mistakes on the first day. But Susan, the audience of the book, who would you say is the audience for this book?
Oh, it's a difficult book to read, George, and I know that. It's a difficult book to write because there's salacious accusations, and people don't want to hear that sort of thing, and I understand that. But anybody who has a family, anybody who's adopted children, foster children, anybody who's a social worker, a teacher, a police officer, an attorney, anybody in the child care system, especially those working in government agencies to protect children, really should read a book like this because it's a primer on what you don't do. There were so many things done wrong. It was the perfect storm. And there's so many people that were involved. Therapists should read this book. I mean, you had some therapists, especially one that was really did the wrong thing and actually made things worse instead of making things better. And well-meaning person, I'm sure she was, but at the same time, after 6.5 years of therapy with these children, this still happened, which was predictable, which she didn't have the expertise to apparently know. But I do want to say one thing I want to make clear that although these children, the first set of children were 4 adopted children, and they were special needs children. The youngest was 5, the oldest was 9 when they came to you. And they had been very, very damaged in foster care, by their biological parents too. And they're not at fault here. They were just trying to make it in the world, and they had so many damages done to them. I can see how this could have happened, but what I do fault is the agency that should have known better. These are supposed to be experts, George. And it's out there. This information is out there. And, that it is predictable for a child who has been sexually assaulted in the early years of development will do the same thing. Of course, not all the time, but it's possible. And that didn't even ever seem to be considered. And I just want to say that I have extreme compassion for every single person in this book, whether it's the accusers, the original accuser, and he had 2 brothers who stood by him, or all the ultimate things that were to happen. And you'd have to read the book just to see the whole thing. It's too much to talk about in a few minutes, but it's just a shame that these children were not helped and harmed instead. And the first thing that any MD knows is do no harm. And anybody working with children and responsible for their care ought to have the same motto: do no harm. And I know there's a ton of workers in Department of Child and Families that have that mindset and toil so difficultly and with so much compassion every day. But when you get a few of them that don't have that and get their minds made up and put you in the guilty box, they're going to go after you is what happened. And they're going to make themselves look good. And when they found out that they had done the wrong thing, then they did everything they could to make it seem that you were guilty. And boy, did they try hard. And in the end, they didn't do it.
Well, Susan, I'd like to go to a caller at this point, but before I do, I just want to say, as the father of these children, it broke my heart to see what happened to them. And not just the 5 that were taken. I mean, that was extremely painful. I can't even tell you the pain that I went through and the amount of years I went through that pain and still suffer these days. However, even the accuser and the older ones, I get it. I get that they had a very bad past, but sometimes, you know, kids just do things and nobody stopped to say, wait a minute, what if? What if the parents that have always been stable, always doing the same thing, always been outstanding, what if they're telling the truth and these children that are going through their teens, that are going through rebellion and everything else, what if they're not telling the truth? And nobody wanted to consider that. Matter of fact, not only didn't they want to consider it, they were nasty about it. Susan, I'm going to take a caller.
Okay.
Let's see how this works. It's the first time taking a caller. Caller, can you hear me?
Good luck.
Hello?
Yes, I can.
Oh, hi. Do you want to give your first name?
Yes, my first name is Debbie.
And Debbie, what kind of question or comment do you have for Susan?
Well, to Susan, the book was awesome. I read the book. I've known George for a while, and I've seen him interact with the children when they were very little, a few of them babies. And I have to tell you, when I spoke about the book was so wonderful in the sense that I got definite visuals when I read the book. Unfortunately, a lot of the visuals weren't that pleasant, but it really opened my eyes to DCF, what these kids went through, more importantly, what George went through. And to be honest with you, I don't know anybody who could have dealt with those children, 9 of them, let alone one of them. He's just a loving, giving, wonderful person. I've seen him interact with the children, read to them, just the way he spoke with them, and there's no way, not for 1 minute, that I believed it. It's unfortunate. The media has also played such a role in this that after reading the book and after hearing his story, I question anything that's in the media. Right away people believe the media and, oh, these two must have done something, and, or this one must have done something, and it's not so. You had commented on the fact that after the trial, there was nothing in the newspaper. It's just all hype, and it's just really sad. And George is he's such a wonderful person, and with these children, and, we all lose things. We go through divorce, we lose children, but he lost everything. And I am so supportive with him, and I hope he takes this as far as he can take it, and so other people can hear his story. And, there's probably a lot of people out there, too, that are giving second thoughts on adopting children or being foster care parents. I certainly would have been, because if they can do it to him, they can do it to anybody. And also the point brought up, too, or why were all these children placed with him? They certainly knew what a wonderful environment it was for these children, and so why keep calling them and asking them? It breaks my heart. And I have a brother who is gay, and it's funny, we discussed this, and anybody who is gay or knows anyone who is gay, gay men are the least likely to do anything with a child.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's ridiculous. Straight people are the ones that mostly are pedophiles and so forth. And so I find that kind of comical when people think, oh, somebody's gay, so of course this must be correct, and just not so. So well,
Debbie, thank you for calling. I appreciate your calling, and you knew George when witnessed him taking care of these children, and I did not. but I had a window into it by the many statements, over 50 statements that people had written into court to support them, support the parents, and draw a picture of what their home was like. And it was inspiring, really. I don't think there's many people that would even have come forward to do half what they did. And you're right to say that DCF placed more children, even though they knew that the first set of adopted children had a sexual history before they were placed.
And
So,
Susan, I'd like to add to
yeah,
that they placed the children with us, not telling us about the issues that the first set of kids had. It wasn't
yes.
even a fair thing to do. And as far as placing more kids, we were doing very well with the kids we had. They were doing extremely well up until they got to their teenage years where rebellion started and their past started to haunt them. Susan, I'd like again to urge people, please give a call. And by the way, thank you, Debbie. I think I know who Debbie actually is after hearing her. Our number here is 202-999-4699. And Susan, while we're waiting for a call to come in, because right now, according to what I see, it's open, so anybody can call in. I'd like to show some of the paintings that you have done, because Susan's also an artist. And I said that,
Okay.
yep, we're looking at your paintings right now. Um, and she is an artist, she's a writer. She's actually very talented. I've actually seen some of her work. And
Thank you.
oh, you're very welcome. You know, an artist is an artist. Um, Again, if people want to call in and questions or comments, it's 202-999-4699. Um,
Well, while we're waiting for that, George, and uh, while I'm happy you're putting my paintings up, this is about the book, and um, um, I really want to say one thing that Debbie brought up was the gay piece. And in the beginning, when you adopted these children, DCF knew you were a gay couple, and they went forward and cajoled you into another two sets of children, which went from 4 to 9, a couple of years in between each placement. But while that would seem to insulate this agency from charges of homophobia, I think that what we have to realize is that an agency is made up of personalities. An agency cannot be indicted for homophobia.
I did feel,
Personalities can.
yes, I have
And
to
and
agree with
I
that.
I had interviewed people. I had interviewed people who actually heard homophobic statements. In one case, you were finalizing an adoption, and a judge in one town wouldn't do it because he felt that for religious reasons he couldn't, and so you had to go to another town to finalize that adoption with a different judge. And the other issue was that there were placements that you were going to have. They wanted to place a boy and a girl with you, and you had gone forward with home visits, and all of a sudden a supervisor with an earshot of somebody who talked to me heard homophobic statements that said that you were a gay couple and they didn't want this little girl placed in the home, although your mother was there full time, and also your daughter was there many weekends and summers. But that placement was squashed because of your sexual orientation. So I think there, in the media, certainly from the calls that you got and from the response that came to you of this abject hatred when this case broke, there was homophobia involved. And who can tell exactly and put a finger on the pulse of how pounding that was? But it certainly was pounding, and I saw it.
You know, Susan,
And it was.
I will say you're absolutely right that there are some workers that were absolutely wonderful, but the ones that got involved with the allegations that were made, it was like a feeding frenzy of sharks. They were just so happy to be attacking, and I could just feel the hatred in them. Um, and there were comments that were made, even during the arrest. There were some things that were done with in the police station, but um, okay. I don't want to get myself upset, so I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to put up some quotes. One of them was the quote that Susan liked very much. It's the one that she picked. It's if you judge people, you have no time to love them. The other quote I picked was sometimes a
Mother
parent,
Teresa.
Mother Teresa.
That's from Mother Teresa.
It's on the screen. You don't have the screen in front of you, but it is on
Oh,
the screen. So
okay.
if you judge people, you have no time to love them. Mother Teresa. Then the one that I chose was sometimes a parent grieves for the loss of a child that is still alive. I grieve for 8 children that are still alive, the 5 younger ones, and I grieve for the other ones because what they might not realize is I remember them as the kids that they were. And the day that the lies started and all this started, it was just unreal. It just didn't seem real to me. I realize that there's a lot of anger and bitterness in them for their past. Um, but I don't see it that way. So it's very hard in the sense that you still grieve for those kids, and especially the youngest 5. I can't even tell you the nightmares I've had about that and the pain that I've suffered with that. Um, but we have open phone lines, and that tells me one of two things, Susan. First of all, we had a hard time connecting, so we were 20 minutes late, so I have a feeling a lot of people maybe gave up. Also, I think that we were having technical problems with the phone lines because some calls came through and were dropped right away. So if you want to call in, please do. The lines are open. You can call in and talk about the two quotes that are up there now. You can talk about what's in the book. Susan, why did you pick the quote that you picked?
Well, I wouldn't have been able to write this book if I had a judgmental spirit. I mean, I don't. I think we're all children of God, and it's not up to me to decide what's accurate and what's not. I mean, I that's something that I believe not just for sexual orientation, but especially for racism. Racism, I've always felt so saddened and profoundly disappointed in our country for how we treat people of different colors. And I remember going out west 40 years ago or 30 years ago and looking at Indian reservations and just my heart cried over what we've done to these people. I just don't get it. I don't get why anybody thinks they're better than anybody else. I've never got that. And and I just love that quote because if you're judging, there's a level of putting yourself over someone else. When you judge someone else, you think, well, I'm better than them, so I can pronounce that they're not so good or they're lower than me, or I don't know how to say it or eloquently or anything. But Mother Teresa put it in a couple of a sentence, and it speaks volumes to me.
Okay, well, thank you, because that was or is a very nice quote. We still don't have any callers, which probably tells me the way the evening's been going, we probably have something wrong with the telephone lines because we did have callers earlier before the show even started, and now we don't, and I see a bunch of drop ones. So if you want to try the call again, please do. Um, Susan, I'm going to go a little bit past 8 o'clock. I'm not sure exactly where to stop because I think we were about 20 minutes late. I cut out all the commercials and some other stuff, just try to keep it shorter. I'm going to have you back again at a time that maybe we have a little bit easier hookup next time. But I do want to call on people to consider buying your book. It's available through George's Family Matters. If you look on the page that has books, it's the first one on there. It's also through Amazon. You can get it in Kindle format. And your other book, The Joyful Life of a Diet Dropout, is available if they email you at Susan Mitchell Collin. That's Susan Mitchell Collin at gmail.com, or you can just contact us at George's Family Matters. Now, I'm saying that there's no commercial involved, but yeah, I'm going to give a little bit of a commercial. George's Family Matters, yeah, I'm going to do it. George's Family Matters was birthed out of the ashes of what happened to my family. It was a very, very sad thing that happened to our family. Um, but you know what? I want good to come out of it. I don't want for the misery that continue for others, for families that go through this. So George's Family Matters basically will refer you to sources that'll help you, either through books. If what you're looking for is not on our site, we have therapists. We have a lot of people behind this, community volunteers, as we call them, that are very willing to help refer you to the right kind of places. There's no charge for anything that we offer on George's Family Matters. Again, it's out of the heartbreak of what happened to my family that I realized that if resources were available for me to go to when things were happening, when they got really bad, it would have been very nice. And even when we were having problems with the kids, a lot of people don't understand the adoption world, not even the therapists sometimes, the trained therapists, which was really scary in our situation. And I don't want people to have to go through that. So I did start George's Family Matters really out of a broken heart and ashes out of my family, and I want people to take advantage of that. It's something where there's a lot of help out there for you. Please take it. That's what it's there for. Susan, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Well, I'd like to say that this past almost 5 years now, and the arrest came in November, so it is 5 years since the arrest came. I have walked with you and seen the devastation, and you look at TV and you see tornadoes and such, and there's nothing left. There's semblance of a home, and that's what I see happen to you. And it's been my honor and privilege to walk with you for these 5 years and do whatever small way that I can, and maybe tell the story so that other people won't have to suffer this kind of thing. Maybe there can be reform of agencies that have too much power, and also the court systems that participate in that. But I have to say that I have nothing but admiration for you and what you did, and the suffering that you've had to endure for this time is inhuman. And it is my great honor to be able to write about that. And maybe even, I'm not the best writer, I'm just starting out as a writer, really. And I often ask God, why did you ask me to do this? Would you get somebody better than me? Which I'm sure he could have, but I felt that God asked me to do this and to walk with you and be with you in this time of trial. And it's been an up and down road. It hasn't always been easy, but it is still, every minute that I see what you have endured makes me just admire you all the more, and that you can rise from the ashes of what was essentially a Holocaust, your own personal Holocaust, and to be able to reach out and say, I want to help somebody never have to do this again, is amazing to me. And I stand in awe of that. And whatever little part I played in categorizing and chronicling the events, I hope that I did justice to it, and probably never could, or nor could anyone, because unless you personally walk through the valley of deaths that you've walked through, although there are no deaths, they were personal deaths to you. I just cannot verbalize how much regard I have for you, that you would not want to walk away, but want to help anyone that would be facing such a turmoil in their lives. I just, hats off to you, George.
Thank you, Susan. The grieving part of it was very difficult for me, to say the least. I'm not going to say it wasn't. It still is to this day. I can't even find the words for it. But to help other people with what I learned through all this, I would love to do that, because it gives me a sense of worth again. It gives me a sense of being needed. And if I can help another family be stronger and stay together and deal with issues as they come up, I'd love to help them identify what those issues are. I think that the book, I never read the book, which I've told you that because it's just too upsetting to me. I read the first chapter, and I just cry too much. I just can't do it. However, I know the story, and I know what's probably in the book, and I know the most of what's in the book. And I just want to say that nobody should have to go through that. There were things that could have been identified very early on, little signs and symptoms that were going on with the children that should have been taken to a different level, that should have been taken by
Yes.
the therapist
Yeah.
to a different level. But a lot of things were
Yeah.
brushed under the rug, and that was unfortunate. Um, um, well, Susan, this is a hard subject for me to talk about, to say the least. Um, Susan, I want to thank you for being on today. I do want to remind people, Dismantled, the Family on William Street East, is on our website. It is for sale. Kindle's available there too. You can look there. It's all there. Um, we had today Suzy Mitchell-Collin. Susan, one thing that I do have to comment on, when you asked how would you like to be introduced onto the show, you told me, she who must be obeyed. And again, I will repeat that, she who must be obeyed. Where did that come from?
Well, if anybody's a PBS fan, I don't know how many years ago this was, maybe 15 or so. There was Rumpole of the Bailey, and he was a British barrister. That's a British word for attorney. And he had a wife named Hilda, and it was a running joke on the show. He referred to her as she who must be obeyed. So my husband bought me a T-shirt, not a T-shirt, a sweatshirt that said that in the front. And I mean, it's just a hilarious thing because nobody has ever obeyed me. Nobody ever listens to anything I say, so it's just like a, an oxymoron or, just a crazy thing that I thought that was so funny because I want to be obeyed. I'll tell you that right now. I want to be obeyed.
Do you have
and
a dog?
Thought that.
Do you have a
But
dog,
nobody,
Susan?
yes. Oh, he does. Yes, he does. That's the only, actually, I think he's a person. He's not a dog. And he does obey me. So I actually, at the end here, I'm finding that. Thank you. I never realized that. Thank you. I have somebody
Well, then
that's
somebody
obeying
is
me
obeying you.
finally.
And Susan, I want to
Yes.
thank you for writing the book because when you first came to my home and called me about it, I was in no mood to think about a book. But then when you said that it's a way to document it, a way for my younger children to see the truth of what happened so they didn't feel abandoned, so they didn't feel like they were not loved. And believe me, they were. They were very loved. I miss them every single day that goes by. I miss them. But I think that the book is a way for them to be able to learn about what happened, understand it a little bit better. It's certainly not going to fix the fact that they were taken from their home. One of the kids, I'm not going to give names, but one of my older sons that's still in touch with me, every day practically. I'm very close to my three remaining children. He calls me often, and I think it was about a year ago, he was talking to one of the smaller kids, and he's now, or at the time, about 13, and he said that he still cries today when he thinks about the family that he had, and he just doesn't understand what happened. I'm sure DCF gave them some form of what they wanted them to believe happened. However, the book really, I'm trusting you that it went over things well. We've talked about it a little bit, so I have an idea what's in there.
Well, that's a good thing to end with, George, because that was my main. There are many reasons I wanted to write the book. One was to reform an agency that desperately needs it. But the main thing, the overriding goal that I had when I wrote this, it was that your young children who have been essentially brainwashed, that you have molested them. That was an ongoing, for years ongoing therapy that these children endured with people that believed you were guilty. And the damage that has done to them is unbelievably just untold. And to read your side of it, that you were never even allowed to say goodbye, and that they were whisked from you without an investigation. And when the investigation proved to them that they had, shot themselves in the foot, they turned to trying to get one of the youngest, who was 4 years old, to make an accusation. And then they worked on the other ones too. I'm talking about the 5 youngest. And to grow up and think that something happened to you that never did is something that it chills my bones. And I wanted to write this. The overriding reason was someday these children will read this, what was written, and say, gee, maybe this never happened to me, and maybe that'll heal them in some way. So that's a good thing to bring up, because that really was my overriding goal and
It's
reason for doing this.
it's what made me agree to let you look at all of our documents, talk to our lawyers, interview family, friends, and everyone else. Um, you talk to just about everybody. But Suzy, thank you. Have a good night. Thank you for being with
Yes,
us.
thank you, George.
Oh,
Appreciate the time.
thank you, and good night.
Okay.
And
Good
for
night now.
good night, and for everyone else, I hope that our next show much less goes wrong, because I couldn't imagine much more could have gone wrong tonight, because I just found out that the link wasn't even available. Um, the date link wasn't even available on the webpage to many for whatever reason. There's a technical problem. Um, but tomorrow night, and I hope it goes much smoother with less problems, we have relational trauma with Lori Landry. It's going to be childhood trauma into adulthood. Thank you for joining us, and have a good night.